Wilson, Principal Tutor of the Cake Makery. On today's Ask Lou, I'm going to show you how to make a very basic sugar rose. To make the simple sugar rose, you'll need flour paste, you'll need some 26 gauge wires, white or green, this doesn't matter, the 5-petal rose cutter, I'll explain about the sizes as we go along. You'll need some glue, some Trex, which will help on your board to stop your paste sticking, some basic tools, ball tool, Dresden tool, a paintbrush and a palette knife, and a pad that we'll use for softening the petals. To start off with, we're going to make a cone on which to build your rose. Take your wire and create a very small hook in the top of it. This is going to ensure that your cone will fix on top of the head of the wire. You now need to make a cone to go on your wire. You can take any old pieces of paste, doesn't matter what colour it is, and you want to make a ball around about the size of a Malteser. Roll it firmly in your hand to get rid of any creases, and then roll it to a point so that you end up with a fat cone. Once you have your cone, you then need to dip your wire into your glue, just a little bit on the end, we don't need lots, and insert it in the bottom of the cone. Just gently ease it up inside there. Your cone now needs to really be dried overnight. Once your cone has dried overnight, you can use this to determine the size of rose you're going to create. Your cutter wants to have a petal a fraction longer than the length of your cone. For your petals, mix your paste in 2 shades. The centre of a rose is usually darker than the outer petals, and it just gives that more natural look. Using the darker petal colour to start off with, take off a piece of your paste, knead it a little bit to create an even texture, and use a little Trex on your board to prevent it from sticking. Flatten your paste out a little bit, and then you can take your rolling pin and roll it really as thin as you can. You can begin to see the board colour coming through. You will probably need to let this surface dry off slightly. It adds a strength to the paste so that when you're moving it about it works better. Now lift your paste and turn it over. Take your cutter and press down onto the paste. Lift away the excess paste, and then if you turn the cutter over, you can make sure that the edges are cut nice and smoothly by just running your finger around those edges. Now you want to take your cell pad and take your petals out onto the pad. Just gently push through the centre to release the petals onto the pad. Make sure they're nicely flattened out, and then use a ball tool to soften the edges of the petal. Just gently stroking around the edges. You can go round more than once. You don't want to make a lot of frilly edges at this stage, but you just want to soften it to make it more natural. Now lift your petals. You can use a board with a hole in it, which would enable you to push the wire through a hole. I like to push the wire down between my fingers through the centre of the petals. Then when you have it held like this, you can paint one petal entirely with glue. Make sure it's totally covered. Then lift that petal up to the top edge of the cone, very top point. Wrap one side of it right the way around the cone. Pinch the top so that the yellow is coming together. You can see the top of the cone is disappearing, and as you bring the other side around, the cone disappears completely. Now you want to turn around to an alternate petal. Miss one out and take the next one. Do the same thing again and paint the whole petal with your glue. Use the same process, bringing it up to the very top of the cone and wrapping it all the way around. This one's not quite as tight as your first one. Now again, move around to an alternate petal, and this time you only want to paint one side of the petal. This side of the petal you're going to bring up towards the point of the cone again, and just gently press that piece on, then move around to the next petal and repeat the process with the next petal, painting just the same side, and bring that one up inside the previous petal, tuck the other petal around it, Move around to your last petal. Repeat the process again up just one side of the petal and tuck that inside the previous petal. You can begin to see the shape of the rose forming. Bring these around each other, just creating that bud shape. And then gently soften the very top edges of those petals. Give them a little movement, make them look a little bit more natural. And this is basically your simple bud. At this stage you could actually fix the calyx onto this rose and complete it like that. Go back to your paste, and this time I'm going to take the lighter colour. You might like to do 2 layers of the darker colour before the light, but this will illustrate how the petals look progressing through the shades. Make sure you have your Trex on the board still. Take your pin and roll it out thinly again. Allowing it to dry off a little on the surface, turn your paste over and cut another set of petals. Take away the excess and then lift your petals and gently rub your finger over that cutter to create that lovely crisp edge. Gets rid of any fluffy pieces. Now you want to bring your cell pad, put the petals onto the cell pad, gently push them out onto the pad, and as your petals work outwards on your rose you want to frill them more. So at this stage we will frill this one more than we did the first set. You can really press quite hard with the tool half on and half off the edge of the petal. Oops. And you can see the movement coming in there. To add a little bit more movement on these outer petals, if you turn over the whole set of petals and gently curl just the very edges, you'll see the effect as it all comes together to create a much more natural looking flower. You don't have to do this on every part of every petal, just a few little curls. I'm using a cocktail stick here and just rolling the paste around the cocktail stick. And then turn the whole lot over again and use your ball tool to gently cup each of those petals a little bit. Now do the same as before, lift it onto your hand and taking your rose, pass it through the centre of the petals and start to glue each petal in turn this time. So up one side and across the bottom of it, lift it up, and the first one will just go against the petals you've already got there. The next petal you will tuck inside the one you've just fixed. So it's going to tuck just inside that previous petal, and a touch of glue on the outside to be able to keep the petals up against each other. Work your way round with a little bit of glue up the side of each petal, bringing it up inside the previous petal. Working your way around each petal in turn to the last one. Clearly I've only used 2 sets of 5 petals here, and it makes quite a small rose. You can go on from this stage and add up to 3 layers of these petals, or you can add single petals still further to make a bigger rose. But that is your basic rose, and you can then add a calyx to the back of this, and that creates a nice small rose to put into a spray for a cake. If you'd like to make a calyx for your rose, you'll need some green flower paste, a 5-petal calyx cutter, a small rolling pin, a pair of scissors, a paintbrush for gluing and a balling tool. Take your paste and you want to make a Mexican hat, a bit like a mushroom. You're pulling up a stalk. Press out around your stalk so you've got a small cone in the centre, and then put it down onto your board with a little Trex and roll using your thin pin from the centre, from the cone outermost, thinning the paste as you go. Check the size of your calyx cutter over your rolled out paste. You may need to leave this to dry off slightly to give it some strength, as you did with the petals, so that you can lift it and release it before cutting it. Press down well and take away the excess. And then lift it up and press around those edges to create those nice crisp, sharp edges. Put your calyx onto your cell pad and gently push it out. Oops. And then you want to thin these a bit further. So use the rolling pin and gently roll them out a little bit more. You can also use your dog bone tool to do this, just softening around the edges. It just elongates those little petals a bit better and makes the edges thinner. Now you want to pick it up and turn it up in your hand so that you can take your small scissors and create a few tiny little cuts on the edges of each of those leaflets. Very random. I've done one on some, two on others, one on each side, it doesn't matter. And when you've done that, you want to take your rose and push your rose right the way down through that centre cone, out through the bottom, and push it up underneath your rose. Once you've got it in position, take a little bit of glue on your paintbrush and paint right the way up every green leaflet, right the way to the tip. At this stage of the rose's growth, the calyx is wrapped right the way up around the flower. And now you want to press each of those right up the flower. And when you're happy with their position, pinch in the bottom to create the shape of that hip. You want to just roll between your fingers to create the top of the hip shape. And bring off any excess down the stem. If you've got too much paste there, just nip off the extra with your fingernail and you'll create that nice bulbous shape at the bottom of your rose. You can take some florist tape to cover your white wire. Simply attach it to your wire, stretching and pulling as you twist it around the wire to make the glue release from the tape and stick to itself. Tape a little below the flower and then push it up underneath. You can also do this before you add the calyx, and then you can keep a continuous green stem emerging from your calyx right the way down your rose stem and pulling it off at the bottom. And there you have your individual rose.